That day, I had planned to go for my routine health checkup. It was a typical morning like any other. I arrived at the hospital in a fairly relaxed mood, thinking I'd be done quickly and could get back to work. I sat at the examination table as the doctor intently studied the computer screen, his eyebrows furrowed. He remained silent for so long that I began to feel uneasy. I asked, "Is something wrong, doctor?" He sighed, turned to look at me with a serious expression and said, "We found a disease, and there is currently no cure." My ears rang. The sounds around me seemed to sink to the bottom of the ocean. Everything grew faint. I could only see the doctor's lips moving as he explained the treatment plan, but I couldn't make out a single word. In that moment, my world shattered. I walked out of the clinic like a robot, still holding the test results in my trembling hands. The hospital hallway was brightly lit, but to me, everything was covered in a gray haze. Each step echoed hollowly, heavy. On the way home, I tried to reassure myself. Maybe the doctor made a mistake. Maybe the results are wrong. But a voice in my head whispered, "No, this is the truth." It felt like I had been sentenced without warning. That night, I lay in bed, my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. Darkness enveloped me, and in that darkness, fear crept into every breath. I thought about my parents, about the people I loved, about my unfulfilled dreams. Everything felt like a painting torn to shreds, scattered across the cold ground. For the first time in years, I turned my heart upward and whispered a prayer, barely audible. "God, if you're real, please help me." I didn't know why I said that. I had never been a religious person, nor did I know much about the Bible. But at the threshold between life and death, it seemed natural for a person to seek a power greater than themselves, beyond the limits of medicine, to cling to. That night, I fell into a restless sleep without dreams, but my heart was heavy. I didn't know that those small whispers would open a journey I had never imagined, a journey to seek and meet the one who knew me before I was born. I lay on my bed, the dim light from the night lamp not enough to dispel the darkness that enveloped my mind. The ceiling was still the familiar ceiling, but it was dark and cold. Each breath I took was heavy and labored, and in the silence of the night, each heartbeat echoed clearly, reminding me that life was passing by second by second. A flood of questions rushed through my mind. Why me? I've tried to live a good life. I haven't hurt anyone. I still have so much to do, so many dreams to fulfill. Why did God give me this news? There were no answers to these questions. They twist deeply into the mind, leaving behind empty spaces filled with despair. I think of the mornings I woke up without noticing that opening my eyes and breathing was a gift. I think of the times I put off calling my loved ones because I thought I had more time. Now, hearing the news that there is no cure, everything suddenly feels as fragile as smoke. The fear of death crept into every breath. I imagine myself lying in a hospital bed, my body weak, my loved one's eyes red from crying. I was afraid of the pain, but even more afraid of being forgotten, that one day I would disappear from this world as if I had never existed. I had never thought seriously about God. From childhood, I heard others talk about him, but to me, it was just someone else's story. I was confident in my health, my abilities, and the future I thought I controlled. But now in this darkness, I realized how powerless I was. Amidst the whirlwind of anxiety and fear, a thought suddenly came to me. If he really exists, then what? I felt my heart touch a faint ray of light. Though it was very small, it was enough for me to want to hold on to it. And then, almost unconsciously, I whispered, "If you really exist, please help me." Just 6 short words, but they echoed in the quiet of the night. It was a clumsy prayer, without embellishment or reasoning, just the cry of someone drowning and hoping someone would grab their hand. I didn't know what I was hoping for, an instant miracle or vague comfort. But in that moment, I felt my heart soften a little, as if someone was listening, even though I couldn't see them. That night, I couldn't sleep, but amid the sighs and silent tears, I realized that I had opened a new door, a door leading to a journey I had never known. But deep down, I sensed that, perhaps, things wouldn't end with this illness. After the results were announced, the doctor asked me and my family to stay behind to discuss the treatment plan in detail. On the table was a thick file filled with numbers, symbols, and charts that I couldn't bring myself to read. The doctor spoke slowly and carefully. "We will do our best to apply all available methods to prolong your life, but I cannot make any promises." Those words felt like a suspended sentence, not an immediate death sentence, but also no clear path to escape. I looked into his eyes and saw the exhaustion of someone who had said this too many times to patients. The doctor wasn't lying, but he couldn't give me any certainty. In the days that followed, I entered a new world, the world of the hospital, a space where time moved differently from the outside, slow, heavy, and filled with the smell of antiseptic. Each morning, the sound of nurses' carts, heart monitors, beep, beep, echoed like a reminder that I was no longer free. Medications, tests, injections, more tests. My body grew weary not just from the illness, but also from the endless treatment process. I looked at my arms covered in needle marks and bruises like milestones of a journey no one wanted to take. But the most unpleasant thing was not the physical pain, but the looks on people's faces. Some looked at me with pity, as if I were a candle about to burn out. Others avoided my gaze, not knowing what to say to me. And then there were those who looked at me with fear. Fear of something invisible, perhaps fear of their own fragility when they saw me. Every day was a battle, not only with the disease, but with myself. I had to fight the thoughts of giving up, the mornings when I woke up and asked myself, what reason do I have to keep going today? Sometimes I wondered if my prayers from the day before had any meaning, because everything seemed just as bad as before. But between waiting for test results, I began to notice the stories around me. There was an elderly man in the bed next to mine who had just had part of his lung removed due to cancer, yet he still joked with the nurses. There was a 12-year-old girl battling leukemia who continued to paint with her remaining hand after chemotherapy. I suddenly realized that here, everyone was fighting. No one was sure they would win, but they kept going. And though no one said it, in the eyes of some, I saw something different. Not despair, but a calm strength, as if they believed in something beyond life and death. I began to wonder about that strength. Was it what I had been quietly searching for in the darkness? Was there really someone accompanying me, even when the road ahead was unclear? My journey to recovery was still uncertain, but deep down a question was burning. If everything was uncertain, could faith become an anchor to keep me from being swept away? My illness spread faster than I thought. One afternoon, as I finished an IV drip, the nurse told me someone was there to visit. I stepped into the hallway and saw Min, a high school friend I hadn't seen in years. He still had the same gentle smile, but there was a hint of worry and compassion in his eyes. We sat at a small cafe across from the hospital. Min didn't ask much about my condition, just listened to me talk about whatever I wanted to talk about. Then he put down his coffee cup and said hesitantly, "There's a group meeting at the church nearby this week. I think you should come. Just sit and listen. No pressure. I know your situation, and I believe you'll find something there." I was taken aback. Church? I'd never set foot in one before. In my mind, it was a place for very devout and very pious people. Definitely not me. But Min's eyes didn't carry any coercion. He spoke as if he were offering me a gift, and it was up to me to accept it or not. That night, lying in my hospital bed, I thought about it endlessly. Part of me wanted to refuse, because I felt I didn't belong there. But another part of me thought, what do I have to lose? At worst, I'll just sit and listen. The hospital room was so quiet, and in that silence, fear crept into every beat of my heart. Maybe I needed a reason to step out of these four walls, even if only for a few hours. On Sunday, Min came to pick me up. The church was nothing like I had imagined. There were no cold walls or dry rituals. Instead, it was a bright, warm space filled with laughter and greetings. Everyone shook hands and asked each other how they were doing, as if they had known each other for a long time, even though I was a complete stranger. When the service began, the piano started playing, and then the whole hall sang. I didn't know the words, so I just sat quietly and listened. The lyrics were simple but powerful. They spoke of hope, of unconditional love, of a God who is always there even in the deepest darkness. I didn't understand all the meaning, but strangely, my heart was touched. Something softened inside me, as if the wall I had built up over the years had suddenly cracked a little. The pastor stepped forward and shared a story about a man with a terminal illness who found peace not because he was instantly healed, but because he knew he wasn't alone. I sat there speechless. The story felt like it was speaking directly to me. When the meeting ended, Min asked me how I felt. I just smiled, not knowing how to express it. I couldn't say that I believed, but I knew one thing for sure. For the first time in months, I felt my heart open up a little. And even though I didn't understand much about God, I wanted to learn more. I had planned to just sit and listen, but I found myself drawn in by every word that was shared. After the singing ended, the pastor stepped up to the wooden platform and held up a worn Bible. His voice was deep, warm, and slow, as if each word had been carefully considered. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Matthew 11:28. He paused for a moment, looking around the congregation. When his gaze swept over me, I felt as if I had been called out from among the crowd. It wasn't just a statement meant for the hundreds of people sitting there. It was as if someone was whispering directly into my mind. I didn't know why, but suddenly I felt a weight rise in my chest. The weary days, the fears, the sleepless nights, the mornings when I woke up wishing I hadn't. It all came flooding back at once. I saw myself as the weary and heavy laden that the Bible verse spoke of. I didn't know why, but suddenly I felt a weight rise in my chest. The weary days, the fears, the sleepless nights, the mornings when I woke up wishing I hadn't. It all came flooding back at once. I saw myself as the weary and heavy laden that the Bible verse spoke of. The pastor continued, "God does not promise that we will not suffer, but he promises that in the midst of the storm, we will have a place to take refuge. He knows every tear you shed, and he says, 'Come to me.'" I bowed my head, feeling as if I were no longer sitting in that crowded room. I saw a quiet space, and in that space there was a gentle but firm voice. "I know you. Not I know your illness, but I know you," as if he knew everything I had ever experienced. Tears began to flow, at first just a few drops, then like a dam breaking. I quickly wiped them away, afraid that those around me would see, but I couldn't stop them. I wasn't crying because of the pain, but because I felt that someone truly saw and embraced all my fears. At that moment, I couldn't call it faith or repentance. I only knew that for a moment, I didn't feel alone in my struggle anymore. Amidst all the chaos of illness and despair, a small ray of light had shone through. When the meeting ended, I left with those words from the Bible still in my heart. On the way home, Min looked at me and asked, "How do you feel?" I replied softly, "Maybe. I'll come back." That night, before going to sleep, I opened my phone, found the Bible verse I had just heard, and read it over and over again. Each time I read it, I felt a little more at peace, as if an invisible hand was resting on my shoulder, gentle yet firm. I didn't know what this was the beginning of, but I knew for sure. Today, God had touched the deepest part of my heart. That night, my room was quiet as usual, with only the ticking of the clock. But inside me, something had changed. The Bible verse from that morning still echoed in my mind. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened." I sat on my bed, the dim light of the lamp casting a faint glow, and decided to try something I had never done before. Pray. With no one to guide me and no idea of the proper ritual, I simply closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and began to speak. Awkwardly, hesitantly, "Lord, I don't know who you are. I've never met you, but I want to know you." I paused for a few seconds, feeling as though I were speaking into empty space. But then, the words flowed naturally without preparation. "I'm so afraid, Lord. This illness. They say it's incurable. I don't know how much time I have left. But if you hear me, please, be with me. That's all I ask. After I finished, I exhaled slowly, as if I had placed a heavy burden down somewhere. Strangely, there was no immediate miracle, no voice from heaven, but a gentle calm began to spread through my heart. It didn't take away all my fear, but it was like standing on a small rock in the middle of a stormy sea, keeping me from being swept away. In the days that followed, I began to maintain this habit. Every night before going to sleep, I whispered a few words to God, sometimes thanking Him for letting me wake up, sometimes asking Him to ease the pain, sometimes just recounting a tiring day. I didn't know if that was praying properly, but I knew it was sincere. I also started noticing the little things around me, the morning sunlight streaming through the hospital window, the young nurse's laughter as she talked to patients, the aroma of coffee wafting from the small kitchen in the nursing ward. Each time I whispered, "Thank you." Once, on a morning when I was exhausted from the medication, I almost gave up. But as I lay down, another Bible verse suddenly popped into my head. I don't know where it came from. I will never leave you, nor forsake you. I don't remember where I heard this verse before, but it stayed with me all day. I began to understand that the first step in faith is not knowing everything about God, but daring to speak to Him, even if it is awkward and simple. And every time I did so, I felt like an invisible thread connecting me to a source of strength, enough to get me through another day. From that day on, in the midst of the storm of illness, a small but steady peace began to grow within me. I was no longer completely alone. There were mornings when I woke up feeling as if all the life had been drained from my body. The pain from the disease gnawed at my flesh, and the medication made me tired and dizzy. In the past, I would have just wanted to lie still and wait for the pain to pass. But now, even though my body was exhausted, I realized that my spirit was no longer as broken as before. I began a new habit, opening the Bible every morning. At first, I only read a few sentences, not always understanding everything. But strangely, each time I read, I felt like a cool stream was flowing through the parched land of my heart. Those words seemed to come off the page, entering my thoughts and soothing my fears. One morning I read the verse, "But those who wait on the Lord will gain new strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint." Isaiah 40:31. I paused for a long time. New strength. I needed that so much. I couldn't find it in a pill bottle or in lab tests. But here, God's word promised new strength to those who wait on Him. In that moment, I understood that the strength I needed wasn't something a doctor could prescribe. It was something only He could give. From that day on, whenever I felt tired, I would close my eyes and whisper, "Lord, please give me new strength today." And strangely enough, many times, even though the pain was still there, I found myself able to smile, talk to the nurse, and even encourage another patient. I realized that my strength did not come from my muscles or my lungs, but from a deeper source, from the one who was with me. One afternoon, while receiving an IV, I saw the elderly woman in the bed next to me breathing heavily, worried because her son had not come to visit. I held her hand and whispered, "Ma'am, God is with you. He will take care of you." She looked at me, her eyes brimming with tears, and held my hand tightly. At that moment, I suddenly realized the strength God gave me was not just to survive, but to be a source of comfort for others. Though the illness had not disappeared, I had found a new kind of strength, one that no medicine could provide, and I knew that it was a gift He reserved for those who sought Him in the midst of the storm. The hospital was a place of machine noises, the smell of disinfectant, and worried faces. But gradually, I realized that my hospital room was no longer just a place to lie and receive treatment. It was becoming a place of encounter, not only between me and others in similar circumstances, but also a place where I encountered God in a deeper way. At first, I simply listened to the stories of those around me. The elderly woman in the bed next to mine had once been a teacher, now hospitalized due to a weak heart. The young man in his early 20s had lost the use of his legs in a car accident. Each person had a sad story, and I realized I was not alone in my pain. In the afternoons, when the faint sunlight filtered through the window, I began to share with them what I was going through. It wasn't a sermon, just a simple sharing. I was also very afraid, but then I found peace, not from medicine, but from God. Some listened in silence, others smiled politely, but I noticed a few reddened eyes. They didn't ask many questions, just looked at me as if wanting to believe what I was saying was true. One day, the old woman in the bed next to me held my hand and said, "Child, the other day you said God gave you peace. I want to know more." I told her the Bible verse that had sustained me. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." As I read it, I wasn't just speaking to her, but to myself. She nodded, then let out a soft sigh, as if something had been lifted from her heart. These conversations became more frequent. Sometimes it was just a word of encouragement. "God is with you." Sometimes I prayed silently for a patient who was sleeping. I don't know if they could feel it, but I believe that every prayer is heard by God. The strange thing was that when I shared about God, I felt my strength increase. It was as if He wanted to remind me that life is not just about enduring illness, but that even in pain, I can still give hope. The hospital room is no longer just a place for physical healing, but has become a meeting place for heartfelt conversations, whispered prayers, and tears wiped away. I know that God is present here, right within these four walls that seem to hold only pain. That morning, I thought I was just going through another routine checkup. The results were usually not very encouraging, and I had learned to prepare myself for bad news. But when the doctor walked in, I noticed something different in his eyes. It wasn't a look of concern, nor was it the usual attempt to remain calm. This time, it was surprise mixed with confusion. He placed the results on the table and sat down across from me. "The numbers have improved, and not just a little. It's beyond our expectations." I looked at the paper, seeing the numbers that had once been my enemies now shifting toward normal. I looked up, wanting to ask why, but the doctor just shook his head. "We have no clear medical explanation. Your treatment plan wasn't enough to produce this level of improvement in such a short time." I smiled softly. In my heart, I knew. Not all miracles come like a strong wind sweeping away all suffering instantly. Sometimes miracles are silent steps of recovery beyond human calculation. That night, I opened the Bible and read the passage. "I will never leave you nor forsake you." I understood that God was not only with me in the darkest days, but also there when the first rays of light began to shine. He did not promise to take me out of the storm immediately, but He promised to be with me through every wave. I began to keep a journal of this journey, not to boast, but to remind myself that every step forward, no matter how small, was a blessing. And that recovery is not just a story of medicine, but also a story of faith. The hospital room tonight is quieter than usual. I sit by the window, looking at the distant lights of the city and whisper softly, "I thank you for the miracle that is happening, slowly but surely." There was a time when I lived in the fear that death could come at any moment, like a dark door suddenly opening and swallowing me whole. Every pain, every breath made me think I was about to leave this world. But now I realize I am no longer imprisoned in that prison of fear. I remember the words of Jesus, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me will live, even though they die." Those words were like an invisible rope pulling me out of the depths of anxiety. Death, once my greatest enemy, is now just a door leading to my true home. I began to see illness in a different light. It was no longer the end, but a journey that God was using to teach me how to live for Him, to cherish each day, and to prepare for eternal life. I understood that God's salvation was not just healing of the body, but deliverance of the soul from eternal destruction. One evening, as sharp pains pierced my chest, I no longer panicked as before. Instead of pleading, "Lord, please don't let me die," I whispered, "Lord, if today is the day I return to you, let me go in peace and meet you with a smile." Strangely, the moment I let go of my fear, a new freedom flooded my soul. I realized that nothing could take away the hope of someone who had been saved. This life is temporary, but the life to come, in Him, is eternal. And so every morning when I wake up, I no longer think, "How long will I live today?" But instead, "How will I live today to glorify Him?" In the past, arguments were a common occurrence in my home. The pressure of making ends meet, combined with everyone's hot-tempered personalities, made the family atmosphere tense like a stretched string. When I fell ill, things got even worse at first. Everyone was worried but didn't know how to express it, so sometimes their words became unintentional knives. But then they began to notice something different about me. I no longer got angry easily, didn't blame anyone, and didn't make excuses for my illness. Even when the pain was unbearable, I still smiled and said thank you. An older sister asked me, "You've changed so much lately. What's your secret?" I simply replied, "Come with me to church and you'll understand." At first they refused, citing busyness. But one Sunday, the whole family decided to follow me, just to check it out. No one expected that. On that day, the worship songs and the sermon about God's unconditional love would touch everyone's hearts. I saw my father, a man who rarely showed his emotions, gently wipe away tears. From that day on, my family began to change. We started spending time praying together in the evenings, something no one had ever thought of before. Meals became warmer, no longer just a means of sustenance, but a time to share and encourage one another. The miracle I saw was not only the gradual recovery of my health, but also how God healed the invisible cracks in our family. I understood that sometimes God heals not by taking away problems, but by changing the hearts of those involved. And I know that my journey is not over. I never thought I would become a storyteller, let alone someone who would publicly share my private pain. But after going through illness and clearly feeling God's support, I knew I couldn't keep it to myself. At first, I just wrote a few lines in my social media journal, recounting the moments when I saw God with me in the hospital, or the Bible verses that lifted me up during the dark days. I thought no one would read it, but to my surprise, many people left comments saying that my story brought them comfort. Some were battling cancer, some had lost loved ones, some were in the midst of marital crises. All said they found a little light in the darkness when they read what I shared. I started making short videos telling my story. No sugarcoating, no hiding the tears, but also no shortage of smiles. Every time I post a video, I pray, "God, please let my words reach the right people." And indeed, each response is proof that He is at work. One woman sent me a message. "I had planned to end my life, but when I heard you talk about the peace you found in God, I stopped. I want to try finding Him." When I read it, I just cried, not because of what I had done, but because God had used someone as weak as me to touch someone so far away. I realized that surviving isn't just about existing. It's about being a witness. God turned my wounds into scars that tell a story, and He turned my story into part of His plan of salvation. If someone asks me now, "Have you been healed by God?" I will smile and say, "Yes, but not in the way you think." I still live with this disease. Every morning when I wake up, my body still aches, reminding me that I am not as healthy as I used to be. But my heart has been completely renewed. In the past, I lived in fear, anxious about every heartbeat, afraid that tomorrow would never come. Now I live in peace, trusting that every breath I take is in His hands. I realize that the greatest miracle is not being healed instantly, but the transformation within, from despair to hope, from fear to peace, from selfishness to love. The disease that once robbed me of my joy has now become a bridge that brings me closer to God. I once thought that the day I was diagnosed was the end of my life, but now I know it was only the beginning of a new journey, a journey with God, not only in this temporary life, but also in eternal life. And I am certain of one thing: though this body will one day grow weak, my soul will live forever in His unfading love. Someone once asked me, "How can you talk about God to others when you are still sick?" I smiled and replied, "Because I know He is real, and true love must be shared." During my days in the hospital, I saw every encounter as an opportunity to sow seeds of faith. One day it was a tired nurse after a long shift, and I shared with her the Bible verse that had comforted me. Another day it was a new patient, their eyes filled with fear, and I held their hand and said, "You are not alone." I didn't always see results right away. Some people just smiled politely and walked away. Others listened for a while and then fell silent. But I remembered the words of the Lord, "The one who sows and the one who reaps will rejoice together." My job was not to make the seeds sprout, but to faithfully sow words of life into people's hearts. At night, when the lights in the hospital room were dim, I would whisper prayers for the people I had met that day. I believe that God can use even the smallest seeds, sown in the darkness of sickness and fear, to one day bloom into the flowers of salvation. And I realized, even when my body is weak, my heart can still be a field for him to use. The darkness cannot prevent a seed of faith from growing when it is sown in love. That morning, I looked in the mirror and noticed something strange. The person in the mirror was no longer the person I had been in the early days of my illness. There was no longer a look of panic in my eyes, no longer a face tense with fear. Instead, I saw a person with peaceful eyes, though the body still bore the marks of pain. I remembered the time before, when everything in my life revolved around success, plans, and dreams for the future. The disease had swept everything away, leaving me alone in an undefined void. But it was in that void that I met God and rediscovered my true self. I realized that I had been running after many things, but I didn't really know who I was or what I was created to do. Now I know that I am a child of God, loved by Him, saved by Him, and given the mission to love others. That day, I not only saw myself again, but I also saw the value of this life. I know that I will continue to live, not to struggle in vain, but to walk in hope, each day closer to the one who transformed me. That was the day I understood. Finding myself is when I let God define me, not my illness, my past, or my fears. Since knowing God, I no longer feel alone during those long nights in the hospital. Every time the heart monitor beeps steadily, I remember that my life is in His hands. On days when the pain is so intense that I cannot sleep, I whisper softly, "Lord, I am here." And strangely enough, I feel Him respond, "I am with you." I am no longer alone because God has placed people around me who are willing to support me. The church has become my second family. They pray for me, bring me meals, and sometimes just sit beside me, listening without saying a word. Their presence is like a reminder that God loves me through the arms of my brothers and sisters. The illness is still there, but with every step I take, I feel surrounded by love. Love from God, from my family, and from my friends. I realize that miracles are not just physical healing, but also God weaving my life into a community of support and sharing. I understand that this journey is not over, but I will no longer be afraid because I am no longer walking alone. The one who goes before me is God, and those who walk beside me are gifts from Him. There was a time when my condition suddenly worsened. The pain returned more intensely and my medical indicators dropped. The doctor looked at me with concern. I thought I was ready to face anything, but in truth, when death drew near, my heart still trembled. During those nights, I prayed more than ever before, but strangely, God did not respond in the way I expected. There was no immediate miracle, no swift recovery, only silence. A silence so profound that I wondered, is He still here? Then I remembered the words of Scripture. Faith is not seeing and believing, but believing even when you cannot see. I realized that this was the moment when God was testing my faith, so that I would know that I believed in Him not because of what He gave me, but because of who He is. I began to change the way I prayed. Instead of just asking to be healed, I said, "Lord, if I have to walk this path, please give me the strength to walk it to the end. And if I live, may my life belong to You completely." The pain did not disappear immediately, but a strange strength rose up within me. I understood that faith is not measured by sunny days, but by how we stand firm in the storm. And I decided that no matter what, I would not let go of God's hand. The storm within me had not yet subsided. There were sleepless nights of pain, long days of exhaustion, and more bad news from the doctors. Yet strangely, I no longer felt the panic I had felt before. I remember one morning, when the sunlight streamed through the window of my hospital room, I opened the Bible and read the words, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid." Those words were like a ray of light piercing through the dark clouds, dispelling the fear that had been enveloping me. The peace God gives is not like the peace of the world. It does not depend on circumstances, test results, or words of reassurance from people. It comes from knowing that I belong to Him and that He is at the helm of my life, even when the waves are crashing. I began to see my days of weakness as opportunities to draw closer to God. Each pain became a reminder to pray. Each tear becomes a seed planted in trust. I realize the storm is no longer an enemy. but a place where I learned to rely on Him more. And in the midst of the storm, I smile, not because everything is okay, but because I know God is here. As long as He is with me, even if storms surround me, my heart remains a peaceful haven. I realized that my journey was not just about overcoming illness, but also about sowing seeds of hope in the hearts of others. Even though I was still weak, I began to write down my thoughts, prayers, and stories about how God had been with me in every dark moment. Once I sent a friend who was depressed a few Bible verses I loved. A few days later, he messaged me back. I cried when I read them. I think I'll try praying. At that moment, I understood. The seeds I was planting weren't advice or solutions, but the belief that there is still light even when all you see is darkness. I also began praying for the people in the ward. Some didn't believe, but they listened quietly. Others asked, "How can you smile when you're so sick?" And that was my chance to tell them about the one who gave me peace. Seeds of hope don't have to be big. Just a kind word, a handshake, or a story about God can sprout in someone's heart. I don't know how many seeds will grow, how many will be forgotten, but I believe that sowing is my part and making them grow is God's part. And when I look back, I realize it is in sowing for others that I am also reaping new life for my own soul. On the day I received my latest test results, I sat before the doctor's desk with an unusual sense of calm. Whether the news was good or bad, I knew I had the answer to the most important question: to whom do I belong, and where is my life headed? The doctor smiled and said, "Your condition is progressing much slower than expected. We can't explain it." I nodded, but in my heart I knew this was God's work, not only in my body, but in my soul. Looking back, I understand that the eternal miracle is not that the illness has completely disappeared, but that I have been renewed from within, from despair to hope, from fear to peace, from selfishness to love. Illness once was the darkness that swallowed all my dreams, but God turned it into a bridge that brought me closer to Him. I know that one day this body will end, but my soul will enter a place where there are no more tears, no more pain, where I will meet the one who held my hand throughout the journey. That is the eternal miracle, eternal life in the arms of God. And now every morning when I wake up, I no longer ask how much longer, but who can I love today? Who can I encourage? Who can I tell about Him? Because this journey continues until I meet Him face to face. This journey began in tears and fear, but it ends in light and hope. I once thought that my illness was a death sentence, the end of all my dreams. But God used that very storm to lead me back to Him, to help me realize that this life is temporary, while the life to come is eternal. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I know one thing for sure. I am no longer walking alone. Every breath, every heartbeat is a gift for me to live for Him and share that love with others. If you are in darkness today, remember that there is one who is still searching for you, just as He searched for me. And when you let Him in, you will understand the greatest miracle is not being healed physically, but being saved spiritually. And that is my story. A story that is not yet finished, because the journey with God will continue forever. If this story touches you, please pause for a moment and pray. Invite God into your life today. Open the Bible, read His Word, and let that love transform you. Share this video testimony with someone who is despairing, so they may also know that there is still hope in God. Subscribe to the Witnesses of Faith channel to continue journeying together in faith.